Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and this is My Life as a Landlord. Goodness. Wow. I'm pleased that you have joined me for today's show. We are exploring the location-specific episode for South Carolina, the Palmetto State. In all of my location-specific episodes, I have included many hyperlinks to the code, different resources, whatever it might be for South Carolina in this state, in this case for today. And each of my location specific podcasts is set up in the exact same way, answering the same four questions. What are the basics of that location? What are the nuances of that location? What are the weird things? And then what about abandoned items when a tenant leaves that location, abandoned items, abandoned property. And then last but not least is where to get help in the local area. Some different resources to get you started as a landlord. And at the very end of the episode, I'll go through what I call my bingo card, which is my list of the most standard items that I see when I do this type of episode. And I'll review what's there, what's not there, what's weird. Pretty kind of interesting when I go through my bingo card because it's a bit of a laundry list. I must tell you that there are more guiding documents. There may be more resources than what I'm giving you here. So this is not everything. You need to do your own research for your own local geographic area on where your rentals may be in South Carolina. Weird things like you may need to register your rental. You may need to do additional licensing. There's all kinds of things that may not apply here, but very well may apply to you. So you've got to do your own research. This is not all inclusive, but this episode will at least get you started. I'll give a shout out today for today's sponsor, Aloha Capital Investments LLC. If you want to know more about real estate investing or you want to put your money to work for you, check out alohajv.com. And I'm going to start screen sharing. Let's see if I can get the right one. Share, and we're going to do this one. Okay, so in today's show notes, I have one, two, three, four, five, six hyperlinks to start. And we will go through each one. So this is called the South Carolina Residential Landlord Tenant Act. And remember, this is a law, right? This is tenancy law. And so this is very legalese. And so there's different parts of this that I've got open here. And so this one is Chapter 33 of Title 27 for South Carolina Code of Laws. Now, I've gone right to southcarolinastatehouse.gov. If you're watching this at YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, it's better to see the screen sharing so you can see it yourself. So this one, there's multiple chapters that are impacting residential tenancy. So, but this one is pretty interesting. It's a legalese and it's quite short, right? You're just defining who's what, who's where, tenant at will, tenant for term, landlord, tenant. And then you've got, let's see, financial responsibility of tenant for utilities, recordation of leases. Okay, fair enough. So a tenant, okay, let's see this. A tenant in South Carolina shall be construed to mean a tenant at will, tenant for a term, tenant for years, domestic servant, farm labor, sharecropper, or agriculture renter. Meaning if you're just doing a ground lease, like if you're going to rent someone's field and put, your crops there, so you'd still be a tenant. I'm a tenant, not a sharecropping tenant, but I'm a tenant. Okay, so that's that one for Title 27, Chapter 33. Let's go to the next one, which is Chapter 35, Property and Conveyances. Now, this one is a little bit longer. Creation, construction, termination of leasehold estates. Now, so this is leasehold estates. Tenancy not to exceed 1 year may be created by oral agreement. Okay, now, if you've been listening to the show, you know that I think that everything should be written down. If it didn't happen, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So anything that says tenancies created by oral agreement, okay, that's by law, but by best practice, don't do that. But they're saying if it's more than 1 year, you must have a written agreement. Okay, tenancies deemed month to month, other than agriculture lands. And this is interesting. Domestic servants, farm laborers, and tenants at will cannot be month to month. Well, it's because it's part of their employment, right? Yeah. Okay, so this is talking about sale of real estate under lease, validity of effective subleases, person deemed in possession of the real estate. Okay. Leasee's obligation to use and maintain, to use and maintenance, leaseholder's right to inspect. Okay. And I'm just going to keep going here. So, attornments by tenants. This is void. Okay, possession. Boy, this is very legalese. Time for payment of rents. Um, time of termination, farm tenancies. There's a lot of farming language in this. Interesting. Okay, unlawful abandonment of buildings without notice, abandonment of premises. Okay, so here we're going to pay this one. We're going to go to this one. When a tenant abandons premises theretofore occupied by him, the landlord may enter and take possession thereof, making the distraint as herein provided of any property found thereon, including property exempt from distress by provisions in another section. The term of a tenant abandoning the premises used and occupied by him shall be deemed ended by such abandonment. Absence from the property for 15 days after default in payment shall be construed as abandonment. Okay, well, there you go. So if there's no payment of rent and there's no indication that they're actually still there, so it's 15 days. Okay. So more legalese stuff. This is not everything. And so I found there's a couple more different codes of laws, Title 27. I'm going to go through some of this. Title 27, mortgage and lease, public record. I think this was all of it except, yeah, so there's all these different chapters. So I've only gone through a couple of chapters. Interesting. Everything in here is about properties and conveyances, including cemeteries, including manufactured home parks, Uniform Unclaimed Property Act. Okay. Horizontal Property Act. I bet that's interesting. Okay, we're going to go to the next one, which is South Carolina Appleseed. This is Legal Justice Center in South Carolina. So this one is way more user-friendly. And that's kind of where we see this. I've done enough of these location-specific episodes that I've seen where you've got the legalese, the legal jargon of everything, because it's actually a law. And then somebody somewhere will actually create like a user's guide or a website, something that is a bit more translatable, user-friendly, and that's what this is. And so download a printable version. I'll just open the printable version because it's probably easier. Yeah, so here it is. So here's the printable version. What is the South Carolina Residential Landlord Act? It is governing South Carolina house, apartment, room renters, and their landlords. There you go. And it also talks about government assisted housing. This law protects you. Don't have a written lease. It still applies, oral and written agreements. Does the law apply to me? It applies to everybody, renters, roomers, landlords, and property managers, but it does not apply to hospitals, group homes, employees of the landlord who are getting their house as a part of employment, tenant who own and partly own the unit, units in a hotel or motel where landlord pays special tax on the room, and there are other exceptions. Do I need a lawyer if I have a problem with my landlord? This is as a tenant-facing perspective. And the answer is maybe. Is there any limit on how much rent I can be charged? There is no rent control in South Carolina unless you live in housing where your rent is based on your income. Talks a little bit about discrimination. This is like frequently asked questions, which is fine. That works too. What should be included in my rental agreement? So it should be the amount of rent paid, the date the rent is due, rules, rights, duties of both the tenant and the landlord, as well as things like utilities, like that's not put in there, but you also want to do that. What should not be included in the rental agreement? They don't want you to include anything that would give up a tenant's right under law, right? That's unenforceable. Okay, can a lease be enforced without either of the tenant or the landlord's signature? Yes, if the landlord gives the tenant a copy and the tenant moves into and pays the rent, the landlord accepts the rent. Okay, can the landlord make new rules after I move in? Yes. But does the law protect me against unfair rules? Yes, you actually have to have certain aspects of it. So you've got to be told about the rules. You've got to have They must be reasonable, clear, fair, and they can't use the rules to avoid his or her responsibilities under the law. And they also can't use the rules for like retaliation, right? What if you don't like the new rules? You should write the landlord within 30 days telling him or her that you object to the new rule. And how much notice must be given before either the landlord or the tenant can end the lease? If your lease is written, which it should be, the amount of notice should be stated in it. And if you have an oral agreement, either the landlord or the tenant may end the lease by giving notice to either party. Proper notice is 7 days if you rent by the week or 30 days if you end by the month, and the notice must be in writing. So that's pretty standard as you do one amount, whether it's 1 month or 1 30-day time. I try to give actually 60 days in the event we're going to shift things around. But that's what it is in South Carolina. What's a security deposit? It's the tenant's money or property held by the landlord in case there are damages to the unit or if the tenant doesn't pay the rent. Money or property? I've never seen that before. Property for security deposit? Okay, that's interesting. How do I get my deposit back when I move? You ask for your deposit back and give the landlord your new address in writing. Keep a copy for your records. The landlord has 30 days after you move out, after you ask for it, whichever is, or after you ask for it back, whichever is later. Oh, so 30 days after you move out or after you ask for it back, whichever is later. When can the landlord keep my security deposit? Your landlord must give you an itemized list for any amounts deducted from your security deposit. This includes accrued rent or damages to the unit, for example. Okay. What happens to my security deposit if the landlord sells the place I am renting? You still have a right to get your security deposit back when the rental agreement ends. So the actual answer to this one is it actually transfers to the new owners. That's the answer, is that the new owners will receive the tenant's security deposit that is held. Okay, so what are the responsibilities as a tenant? Pay rent on the date that it's due. Do not harm the landlord's property or disturb other tenants. Do your part to keep the unit safe and clean. Be responsible for your guests' action. Okay. What is rent? It's any payment for the use of charge of the rental unit. Payment includes late charges, but not security deposits or any other charges. A security deposit is actually a liability for the landlord, right? It's the tenant's money. Rent is actually a fee for service. So even though they're all paid in the same currency, the rent is actually a fee for service. Then the late payment is that service charge as well. If I don't pay the rent, what can the landlord do? He or she must send you a written demand giving you 5 days to pay the overdue rent. If the rent is not paid within these 5 days, the landlord can go to the magistrate and bring a case against you, try to evict you. Check your lease. Your landlord does not have to give you a written demand for the overdue rent if your lease says in big print that no additional notice be given beyond the notice in the lease. So if you are a landlord in South Carolina and you have in your lease in big print, which I don't know what size font that is, but in big print that no additional notice will be given beyond notice in the lease. Yeah, no additional notice. Wow. If you have a written rental agreement, the landlord only has to give you written notice for the overdue rent once during the period. Interesting. But you've got your 5 days grace period. Okay. If I've not paid my rent, can the landlord take any of my property? Only if the landlord goes to the magistrate and has served you with a distress warrant allowing her to hold your property. Some property cannot be taken, and if you're served with a distress warrant, you should see a lawyer immediately. So the answer typically is no, but only if the law allows you to take rent or take property for back rent. That's not normal in residential tenancy situations. Interesting. Okay. Conduct. This is interesting. These are getting very good scenarios. I like this. So here's the question. My landlord wants to evict me because my children have been leaving garbage outside the dumpster and he claims it is attracting rats. Can he do this? The answer is yes. It's a health and safety issue. Okay, next question. Sometimes my friend comes over and creates a disturbance by kicking the door, breaking windows. Can I be forced to move out? Maybe. It depends on how often this happens or how serious it is. Now, I would push back and say the answer is yes, because you're causing damage to the landlord's property and you're probably disturbing quiet enjoyment of not only other tenants, but other neighbors as well. And I'm guessing that the tenant doesn't like this person doing this to their home. Okay, I can't afford to have my water turned on right now. Can I be forced to move out? Yes. If the plumbing will not work it is illegal to live in unsanitary conditions. So if because the plumbing will not work because you can't afford the water, the answer is yes. It's also a health and safety issue. Okay, my landlord came in to fix my sink and left me a note that the house was a health hazard, and unless I straightened it up, he would evict me. Can he do this? Not if your apartment was only messy. If your house is rat or roach infested because of how you keep it, then he can. So it's health and safety. If you've just got habits and you're cluttered and you're messy, that's one thing. But if you're attracting rodents, or like let's say there's mold, right? That's another thing as well. Complaints, evictions. I'm not going to read through all of these. You can see this in the hyperlinks as well. Landlord. Let's talk about the landlord for a second. What are the landlord's duties? The landlord cannot interfere with your use of the property. Landlord must make all repairs and keep the unit in a livable condition. And if you live in an apartment building, the landlord also has to keep all common areas like stairs, hallways, yards, and the parking lot in safe condition. Can the landlord refuse to make repairs if I'm late or behind in paying rent? No, the landlord still has to keep it has to keep the unit in habitability. Do I have to fix the landlord's furnace or plumbing? No, the landlord must make running hot and cold water available and must keep the electrical plugs, plumbing, ventilation, appliances in safe working order. Okay, so then it talks about what happens if the landlord isn't making repairs. What should they do? Give the landlord written notice of the problems. Warn him that if the problems are not fixed in 14 days or within a reasonable time, you will move. If the landlord still does not make repairs, you can move and no longer owe any more rent. He must still return security deposit if there are no reasons to hold it. Again, no normal wear and tear exceptions there. So, okay, interesting. So let's go back to that hyperlink though, because there had all these different clicks, but this one, is this the housing? Let's go to housing. Okay. So this is again, we're on scjustice.org. This is the South Carolina Appleseed Legal Justice Center resources and housing publications and links, eviction process, rent to own home sales, rent calculation, public housing, repairs by landlords. Let's just click on that one. Let's see about that one. Okay, so this is more of the frequently asked questions. In fact, this looks like the exact ones that we had just talked about. Okay, fair enough. But it has all these. This is pretty interesting. Housing publications and links. Let's just go into that one, see what's there. The eviction process, it's got available in multiple languages. That's kind of cool. Rent to own home sales, manuals, advocates to Fair Housing Act. That's good. Fair housing is not only federal, but it can be state based and as well. PowerPoint presentations, South Carolina landlord tenant law. Let's look at this one. Okay, so this looks really cool. I'm going to actually put this into the show notes. This is actually really cool. Okay, so South Carolina Residential Landlord Tenant Act. Start the slideshow. Let's just go to the next one. I'm not going to delay on this. Okay, so it talks about, here's some contact information. So South Carolina Bar Lawyer Referral Service serving the general public, meaning landlords and property managers and tenants. And then South Carolina Legal Services serving low-income communities. So you've got both numbers there. And I've got a couple other hyperlinks that is also for the bar, South Carolina bar. So this talks about which parts of Title 27 are applicable. Some of these are in this episode: ejectment of tenants, rent, manufactured home, federal law, Federal Housing Act, and then South Carolina Fair Housing Act. And this one, yeah, we've gone through a couple of these already. So let's go in here. Tenancy. Is a written lease required? No, but it's smart to have one. We've talked about this. What is not allowed in agreement? We've gone through that. And obligations of the landlord. The landlord must deliver the unit at the beginning of the lease term. Okay. Landlords must maintain the premises and common areas, making running water reasonable. It's hot water and heat. maintaining electrical, gas, plumbing, sanitary, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and other facilities and appliances in reasonably good and safe working condition. And it says this is actually interesting. Appliances located in the unit are presumed to be supplied by the landlord unless the rental agreement says otherwise. Appliances presumed. Okay. Be held unless otherwise. Yeah. So if the landlord is supplying it, it has to be in safe working order. Okay. Uh, doo, doo, doo. This is talking about additional rules and regulations for the landlord. Limitation of liability. Yeah, this talks about transferring it. So landlords, this is prohibited conduct by landlord. This is interesting. So it says they cannot abuse their right to access the premises, which I know that is on my bingo card. They cannot shut off essential services, like they can't shut off any of the utilities. They cannot improperly exclude the tenant from the unit, and that's basically discrimination. They cannot engage in retaliatory conduct for a tenant's complaint, or I bet there's some other applications there as well. Or landlords cannot fail or refuse to comply with requirements regarding the return of security deposits. And then the tenants must do their items as well. They've got to pay the rent on time, behave, keep things clean. And yeah, they cannot abandon the rental unit, but we'll talk about that if they do, because it does happen. Okay, when a landlord can enter the unit without consent in case of emergency, and then what are regular working hours between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. for regularly scheduled services, if stated in the rental agreement conspicuously, and you've got to give proper notice that you're going to come in for some reasonable item. Let's see. Oh, it says the hours are different, 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. To provide services requested by the tenant, like if something needs to be repaired, and you still have to give proper notice, or if a court orders it, other limited circumstances as well. So proper notice in South Carolina is landlord must give 24 hours notice and can only enter at a reasonable time. So you cannot just call on the fly, and you can't do it after hours. Makes sense. Lease termination by landlord by non-payment of rent. Tenant has 5 days from the date the rent is due to pay. And or if breach of lease material affecting health and safety or physical condition, landlord must give a 14-day written notice to the tenant unless it's an emergency. And there can be an emergency on either end, whether it's an emergency affecting the condition of the unit, or if there is a emergency like domestic violence or something illegal happened. Yeah. Abandonment of the unit. Here we go. So abandonment of the unit, we've talked about this already. If there's an unexplained absence by the tenant for 15 days after a failure to pay the rent, or if the tenant has voluntarily terminated the utilities and there's an unexplained absence to failure to pay the rent, the 15-day rule does not apply, but abandonment is considered immediate. Now, here's where the abandonment of property items comes in. If abandonment, the tenant leaves the property less than $500 in value, then the landlord can enter the unit and dispose of the property. If abandonment, the tenant leaves more than $500 worth of property in the unit, the landlord must deal with the property through the ejectment procedure. Basically, you have to get permission to move the items as well. So, and that's typical. When you see abandonment of items, there's usually a time period of how much time do you have. In this case, it's 15 days, but that's for the abandonment of the unit, not the items. And then there's a dollar amount, and there's some kind of a threshold, and that's what it is in South Carolina. It's $500. Lease termination by the landlord through normal ending of lease. Written notice of the termination is at least one term's notice. So if it's week to week, it's 1 week's notice. If it's month to month, or for 1 year, it's 1 month notice, which makes sense. Lease termination by the tenant, if there is a issue with breach of lease, the material affects the health and safety or physical condition of the unit. Tenant may give 14 days notice to the landlord in writing, or if the landlord fails to deliver possession of the unit to the tenant for whatever reason, like there's some construction going on and the construction runs over, and you're not able to actually give the tenant the unit to move into. The tenant can give 5 days written notice to the landlord to terminate, and they can get back any prepaid rent or the security deposit, or they can demand a performance of the rental agreement. They can say, no, I don't have anywhere else to go. I need you to put me in this unit. And I've been in this situation. It's not real fun. So fire and casualty damage, this talks about the unit habitability. unlawful oyster or exclusion by the land oyster. How about ouster? Haha. So no specific notice required, but the tenant can either recover possession or terminate rental agreement and three times the rent, which is twice the actual damages. Basically, you can't out someone, you can't kick them out unlawfully. And if you do, then it's three times the rent or twice the actual damages, whichever is greater. So they just hammer the landlord for doing stuff illegally. Don't do that. Security deposit. We talked about this. Ladder of 30 days from the termination date or demand from the tenant. And if you're going to withhold, you have to have an itemized damage list plus refunded portion if there are damages. And the tenant must provide in writing with a forwarding address for security deposit return. You have to supply that. Um, okay, that talks about jurisdiction. This talks about serving. And this talks about all of the different ways that you can serve them. Evictions, timing of evictions. While the case is pending, the tenant must keep paying the rent. You can't stay there for free. Foreclosed properties and how tenants are protected in foreclosed property. Remember, a foreclosed property is simply a change in ownership, right? Like that's what it is that the bank takes over for whoever the owner was. That's all it is. And so for the tenant, it might be a change in membership, might be change in management, or it might be change in who you pay your rent to, but it's just a change in ownership. The deposits would also transfer to the bank, who is now liable to pay that because the tenant's money that was given for security deposits, it's still due. Whoever the owner is, it's still due to the tenant when they leave. Okay, this is foreclosed property. So this is talking about different methods if someone is at the end of their lease. Okay. Now, you can't discriminate anybody, Federal Fair Housing Act, and then there's fair housing laws in South Carolina that are more strict, which is interesting to see. That's actually a good thing. Refusal to rent, refusal to negotiate for housing, making housing unavailable, falsifying, stating that housing is unavailable for inspection or rental. Okay, and then Fair Housing Act does give additional rights to the disabled and people who make reasonable requests, reasonable modifications. What are reasonable modifications? Things like having a doorway widened to fit a wheelchair, having a ramp added to fit a wheelchair, grab bars to a bathtub. We've done that lots. Someone requests that. That's not a big deal. We do it. We do not let the tenant do it. Um, and then it stays with the unit, right? And of course, this has actually made a good point that this is for older buildings. Newer buildings likely would already have some of these features. Okay. Additional rights to disabled, reasonable accommodations. Reasonable accommodations are necessary changes to landlord's rules or policies to help a disabled person use the housing. So reasonable accommodation, for example, is allowing a seeing eye dog in a building where pets are not allowed. Now, but remember, if you've been listening to this show, a pet has no job. A seeing eye dog is a service animal that is performing a service. They are doing a job. So that service animal is like I liken it with having like a prosthetic leg. The dog is doing a job. The leg is doing a job. And so you can't say, well, you can't have your German Shepherd or whatever the seeing eye dog is because we don't allow pets. It's not the same thing. And so this is very, very controversial. One of the other options of a reasonable accommodation is marking a disabled parking available in front of a unit for a disabled person. And South Carolina does have a state fair housing law, and there is more information for the South Carolina Appleseed Legal Justice Center in Columbia, South Carolina. So if you want to give them a call, you certainly can. 803-779-1113. Okay, so that was that one. I have added that in. I'm going to keep going because I have some more hyperlinks, and then I'm going to go through my bingo card here. Unclaimed Property Act. This was talking about abandoned items, which we've actually already gone through quite a bit. And there is a bunch of references in here. So I'm going to leave that be. I'm going to keep going here. This is, South Carolina Legal Services. So the website is sclegal.org. And this is talking about how to help for different legal questions that you might be, whether you're a landlord or a tenant, either one. You can ask a question. And so they have general information about renting, eviction information, public housing eviction information, because those can be different. Mold and other issues, repairs with rental property, and non-traditional rental eviction information. That sounds interesting. Let's go to that one. Non-traditional rental evictions information. So non-traditional. So this is evictions from mobile homes, evictions from rent-to-own situations, and evictions from hotels. Okay. In this podcast, none of those apply. So I'm going to go back. General information about renting. I suspect this is going to look very similar to what we're doing. A Rent Smart. There's a bunch of videos here, which is actually really cool. Well done, South Carolina. Yeah, sclegal.org. All about this. Lots and lots. Renter's insurance. Boy, I haven't seen that in a long time that somebody's got renter's insurance in there. So I've clicked on the 10 things that you need to know before you rent. Um, this is only 13 slides. And let's just go through and see if there's anything else. Key lease terms, right of entry, other issues, pets, parking, noise, rights to common areas, responsibility for common spaces, including landscaping, like mowing. That's important. The other one that people don't think about is snow removal. If snow removal is an issue where you are, you need to say who's going to do snow removal, especially if it's something that happens all the time. That's just, you got to know who's going to do it. Collaboration between landlord and tenant, location and costs. This is talking about trying to find a roommate. Renter's insurance. This is the first time I've seen renter's insurance. This is actually a good time. Well, it's not the first time, but I haven't seen it often, and it is on my bingo card. Renter's insurance, cheap and necessary, costing as little as 12 bucks a month. And it's basically, it covers your belongings as a tenant if they are stolen, destroyed in a fire, or if there's theft from other places, such as from the trunk of your car. And then there is a bunch of ways that you can get help from this. Boy, they have all kinds of stuff. This is actually really cool. I'm going to put this in the show notes too, because it's really good. 10 things you should know before you rent. There you go. Okay, then we're going to go to the last one. This is the South Carolina Bar. So this is scbar.org. And this is talking about lawyer referral service. So if you are having a question, you've got a concern, you've got an issue going on, which is the only reason that you'd be looking at this, is you can look for legal help, free legal answers. There's a bunch of resources here, free forms. Let's look at the forms here. Doesn't look like self-represented divorce. That's not us. Children's issues, healthcare, power of attorney, resources for seniors. Senior Citizens Handbook. That's interesting. Your guides to magistrate court. Okay, so let's see in the magistrate court if there's anything in here, but then we're going to move on to the bingo card here. Your guide to magistrate court. Now this is quite long, so let's just look in here, see. Forms, counterclaim. Yeah, this is all the legalese stuff. I'm going to go back. Free legal answers. Let's see what we've got here. Free legal answer. See if you qualify, ask a question. Check your email. Okay. This might be into a bigger page where you have to sign up for it. That's why it has all the states, not just South Carolina. Okay, not excited about that. Closing that. Find a lawyer online and you can call them. So it's 803-799-7100 and talk to someone for each participating lawyer agrees to charge no more than $50 for a 30-minute consultation. And if the consultation extends 30 minutes or you hire the lawyer to represent you, they'll charge his or her normal fees. They don't take pro bono cases. So if you are a landlord in South Carolina, you have a question, go to scbar.org and at least do a consultation. It can't hurt you. 50 bucks, it might be money well spent. Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to go through my bingo card because there are some items that I know did not get answered in this. Let's start. Tenant application fee. Didn't see anything about a tenant application fee. Grace period for late rent without a penalty. Yes, we saw that was 5 days. the actual late amount, a late fee, excuse me, late fee amount. Was it a percentage, a flat, or a max dollar amount? I didn't see anything about the amount, but I suspect that whatever that amount is, you'd probably want to check it first. Check it with one of the legal resources that we talked about, but make sure that it's in the lease. Make sure that it's in there. Also, remember that it's got to be big print, no additional notice for late rent. Remember, that's important. Security deposit method, payment of money and or property, which is kind of weird. Never seen that before. I'm not really sure what property that you would cough up for your security deposit, but money only. There's no real, it doesn't have to be interest bearing, doesn't have to be a separate account, doesn't say where it has to be, it just has to be money. Lease wording and details, it does have some information on what needs to be in the lease if you have a written lease, which I highly recommend. So there is some lease wording in there. Is an emergency contact required in the event of tenant abandonment, incapacitation, death, or imprisonment? No. Best practices, though, make sure you get an emergency contact of some kind for that tenant, and make sure you're updating it periodically because things do and can change. Pets and animals, pet deposit or pet rent. The only time we saw anything about pets was in that PowerPoint presentation for South Carolina Legal Aid. So I didn't see anything regarding pet deposits or rent. Delivery of a signed lease required. No, I didn't see anything that it was required. It should be best practice. If you do have a written lease, which you should, then you do need to deliver the written lease, but not according to South Carolina law. Condition inspection at move-in. We didn't hear anything about a condition inspection at move-in or move-out, but if you are going to do deductions in a security deposit at any time, it is a good idea that you have both. Make sure it's written. Pictures are a good backup, but don't just do pictures. Many courts, not just in South Carolina, but there are many locations that will not accept just pictures, so be careful. Let's see, standard warning letters or wording. There was some, not really, not forms or templates. Required maintenance inspections? Nope, not that I saw. How often can the rent be increased? It didn't say how often it can be increased. Proper notice on a rent increase. It just talked about there's no rent control. So it looks like you can increase the rent as much or as often as you want, as much as you want. Renter's insurance was mentioned. It's a good idea. Abuse of access is defined. It does have quite a bit of information about working hours, proper notice, reasonable reasons to actually go into a unit. Landlord retaliation defined and or timing. So it doesn't talk specifically about landlord retaliation, but the items that would be involved in a landlord retaliation situation is defined. Like if somebody has, if a tenant makes a complaint of some kind and the landlord wants to retaliate by either decreasing services, increasing the rent, or trying to evict them, some of those actually decreasing services specifically and increasing the rent is mentioned. There's nothing about retaliatory eviction or how much time that must elapse for that. So that's typically when there's a landlord retaliation defined, that's typically in there. Is the end of a fixed lease abrupt or automatically convert to periodic? No information on that. I did not see anything regarding a holdover. Holdover is when a fixed lease ends abruptly and someone has overstayed. I didn't see any wording like that at all. So it's unclear. It's probably fixed that ends abruptly. But again, I don't know. Maybe it automatically converts and we didn't see it. I don't know. Return of deposit or bond timing. So return of deposit in this case, it's 30 days after the tenant departs, but they must also give their forwarding address in writing, and they must request the deposit, whichever is later. So it doesn't say how much later. So I wonder if you could go years later and say, and write your landlord and say, hey, remember me, I'm your tenant from so-and-so. Here's my forwarding address. I'd like my deposit back. Technically, according to what we've seen, that actually is valid. Can you use the deposit as last month's rent? Yes or no? Did not say, which means probably not, but did not say. How long until you can give notice of eviction due to non-payment of rent or utilities? Notice of eviction. So it's 5 days to a late fee, and it looks like 15 days because if it's 15 days and there's an absence after non-payment of rent, it is deemed abandoned. So it may be somewhere in there, but that's not clear. How long can you give notice of eviction due to mischief? It looks like it was 30 days, might be 14, depending on the situation. And the same thing for a tenant who wants to depart due to habitability problems or maybe like domestic violence. That happens way faster, right? How long until you can get possession of a unit? Looks like 15 days unless you go to a magistrate. And then abandoned items. The value of abandoned items, that threshold was $500. And it didn't talk about anything regarding administrative, cataloging, or inventory, storage timing, or disposition instructions. But if it's over $500, there is a separate procedure. So you want to make sure that you are looking at that, but it's deemed abandoned right at 15 days. So there's no storage, there's no nothing, but there is like if it's more valuable, so just make sure if you're in this situation that you are doing your homework and you're asking these questions. Like I said, you've got plenty of resources that I named, and there's probably more that I didn't name that you can go and get some help for yourself. Okay, that's it for South Carolina. Let's wind down here, knowing that each of my location-specific podcasts is set up in the same way, answering the same 4 questions. What are the basics of tenancy laws in that location? What are the nuances of that location? What is some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant? And then where to get help in the local area, in this case, South Carolina. I then reviewed my bingo card of standard items that I see most often in tenancy laws in different locations. This is the same format in every location-specific episode. So if you're interested in another geographic area, you already know what I'm going to talk about, just change the different location. Again, this episode is not all-inclusive. You must research further in your specific area, including the different boroughs in South Carolina. So if you're listening to this podcast, chances are that you are either new to real estate or you're about to be new to real estate, or you're an existing landlord within South Carolina. Things you can do to help yourself are, one, educate yourself on the South Carolina residential tenancy resources, including the Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, among others. The second thing you can do is you can join the conversations with other South Carolina landlords. Now, you can do that in person with other local meetups in person. Just Google it or jump on social media. Or you can jump into other landlord conversations virtually, and there's plenty of landlord forums. Just jump in and say, I'm a landlord from South Carolina. There may even be a specific group for South Carolina landlords that you can learn from. So make sure that you are jumping in and having these conversations. I hope you enjoyed today's show all about South Carolina. Don't forget to subscribe to My Life as a Landlord for more expert advice and real stories from across the rental property world. I'm recording today's episode from Maui, Hawaii. Why? Because real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode live right now in the library, episode 195, all about Kentucky. Thanks.